Hello, friends, and welcome to episode 3 of the Mythological Africans Deep Dive series. This time, we are going to be talking about women's societies.
First, we're going to define what we mean by women's societies. This will involve making a distinction between women's groups and women's secret societies, and then providing some historical context around these organizations. Then we'll look at some case studies from across the African continent, specifically the Bundu or Sunday Society, which is found in Sierra Leone, Liberia, Ivory Coast, and Guinea. We'll look at the Manikin Society found amongst the Ejagan people in Cameroon and Nigeria. We'll look at Umada and Yomdi, which are women's groups found amongst the Igbo in Nigeria. We'll look at Takum Anu Finguen, found amongst the people of the Northwest region in Cameroon. We'll look at the Mauritius Women's Cooperative, found among the Maasai women in Kenya. Then we'll look at Umoja Village, which is found among the Samburu people in Kenya. Then we'll zero in on the issue of female genital mutilation because that's a theme that shows up in a lot of these groups, and I think it deserves some attention.
So, what do we mean when we talk about a women's society? These are organizations convened by women for women. And what this means is that they operate largely independent of the input, influence, or control of men. That is a relative statement, however, because what you will find is that in the communities where these women's groups or societies occur, they work in collaboration with the complementary men's groups or societies in these communities, or they work collaboratively with whatever power structures that exist. That these could be patriarchal or matriarchal power structures. What role do these societies fulfill? Quite a few. They provide a means through which women can participate in community organization and development, in political issues, in economic activities. They provide a really important support role, so psychological and social support, and we'll see when we start looking at the case studies, we'll see exactly how some of these play out. And quite often, they fulfill a very important religious and spiritual role in the communities. Women's societies have always existed in human society, whether it's the cults that developed around the worship and veneration of certain goddesses, or craft guilds where women who knew certain crafts like sewing, weaving, pottery, all the things that contributed to human civilization, people would form groups around this, and quite often the women who participated in these activities would come together to work together to support each other. But there are modern iterations of women's groups across history, not just on the African continent, but across the world. There are book clubs, there are nunneries within the Catholic Church, for example. There are alumni associations, and if you are from a country that has women's groups, often they're associated with schools. For example, I come from Cameroon, and the alumni associations of the girls' schools are very powerful entities within communities. There have been advocacy groups. You think about the suffragette movements, for example. And then there's in some communities where they have an age cohort, so people born at the same time within the same year, within the same period, will come together to support each other, and they sometimes do this along gender lines. So you have women's groups and men's groups. And it's important to make the distinction between women's groups and women's secret societies. Now, a secret society is a group that comes together for a certain purpose, and they usually have very strict rules they follow about who has access to the knowledge that they share within these groups. And as we will see, secret societies are a very important way in which communities in Africa and across the world organize themselves. I will say here that the word secret is there for a reason. Um, these groups tend to keep their plans and the way they organize themselves secret. So there is information. There are instances where people have taken information from these groups and published them. What I will try to do here when I talk about the secret societies is to make sure that the information I share is not information that would be considered privileged, because these, especially on the African continent, these groups serve an important function, for better or worse. And I do want to be respectful for that, especially since a lot of them are still very active. Now, women's groups are distinct from secret societies in that they usually don't have, specific protocols that they follow, which need to be kept secret. They tend to be open. We look at alumni associations, book clubs, and things like that. They are pretty open, and they carry out their affairs in publicly. Um, so why do women's groups exist? Why do secret societies exist? Why do these things exist? The most important role they fulfill is providing a means by which women can move through a society while recognizing the different stages that they move through. So there, you have a child is born, she's a girl, she becomes a woman, and then she becomes an elder in society. That transition from girl to woman, which usually implies becoming a mother or wife, is marked by certain rites of passage. And what these groups do is that they provide the context through which these rites of passages can be enacted. As a woman goes from mother and wife to grandmother or widow or whatever stage comes after that, there are also certain rites of passages that are enacted to mark this transition. And in our modern world, we might not pay too much attention to these rites of passage or give them too much weight, but they are important, especially for psychological and social support. It's important to recognize how your life changes, because it's not a small thing, to go from a child to a woman within a society, a wife, a mother, or whatever role you choose to fulfill as a woman. And it's not an insignificant thing either to go from that to grandmother or to go to widow. These are important transitions, which usually come with important psychological and social changes which need to be recognized and need to be facilitated in a way that keeps people healthy and balanced. And these transitions are usually marked by rites of passages. And as we will see when we start talking about specific case studies, rites of passages have a pattern that they follow. So there's usually a period of separation where the person or the people are taken, to a separate physical location. They learn things, they are trained in certain ways. And while they're in this separated places, a period of liminality or marginality, where they're not really a part of society. They are in a transition period. And then when they have completed this training, this um, um, teachings, learnings that they need to learn in order to complete this transition, then they are reintegrated in society, and they are new, they occupy a new function within these societies. So these women's groups and societies are mechanisms through which these rites of passages for different stages in a girl or woman's lives can be recognized. What other role do these women's groups fulfill? Why do they exist? As we talked about before, they provide mutual support for women. This could be in the form of economic support, it could be in the form of childcare, it could be in the form of support during old age or illness, general psychosocial support, and spiritual support as well. And like I said, when we start looking at case studies, we'll see the specific ways in which these kinds of support play out. Why else do these groups exist? They serve a purpose of aggregating the power of women. They provide them with protection, and they create balance in societies. Why do women need power? Why do women need protection? The patriarchy. We know very well how the aggregation of power into the hands of men has resulted in women being oppressed across different communities across the world and across time. So these groups often serve as a way to give women a say in society's protection from abusive husbands, protection from abusive relatives, and protection from abusive communities that organize themselves in ways that do not serve in the women's best interest. Now, it is important to note here that sometimes these women's organizations themselves become tools of patriarchal oppression, and we'll talk a little bit about how that works out. But the original intention behind a lot of these groups are to give women a way to protect themselves, to empower themselves, and to create balance within societies. How else do these groups serve as protection and balance? In cases of social instability, when there are wars or there are changes that affect communities at a large scale, these groups usually serve as a way to keep people together, supply them with what they need, and give them a way to move forward. Knowledge sharing is another important role that these societies fulfill in communities. So when these girls or women are in that period of separation and seclusion, it's not just an idle time. They're learning a lot of things, values and skills that will serve them in their communities.
Our first case study is the Bundu or Sunday Society, which is found in Sierra Leone and Liberia mostly, but also in Ivory Coast and in Guinea. This is an old, powerful, and very secretive women's society. The first recorded instance of Bundu or Sunday, as it is also called, was in 1668. And the central tenet of the Bundu Society is that disrespecting or maltreating women offends the ancestors who are the ultimate source of the laws and blessings that move a community forward. So, by becoming initiated into Bundu, women are assured of respect as wives, as mothers, through the laws that bind everyone in the society. Bundu has a complementary male organization which is called Poro, and these two secret societies are the mechanisms through which these communities were kept within the laws and the rules that they intended for themselves. Bundu is not a centrally organized entity. There are autonomous local chapters, and what happens is that each a woman who knows the secrets, who knows the protocols of the Bundu Society, establishes a chapter and starts initiating girls. And if she's charismatic and knowledgeable enough, she attracts a following, and people bring their children, their girl children, to her for initiation. And this is usually a really it goes by geographical location, so it's rare that you find someone from one part of the country or from one group of people going to initiate their child into a Bundu society found in another group. Each local chapter has the leader. They also have a council of advising elder women, as well as women with specialized functions. And through Bundu membership, women have access to a lot of things, the main one of which is political power, because especially in Sierra Leone and Liberia, women have the ability to become political leaders, and this is usually through Bundu, because this is a case where in these countries, up to 80 or 90 or even more percent of the women are initiated into Bundu, and a great number of the men are also initiated into Poro. So by being included in these groups, you have the support of the people in these groups, and if you're charismatic and you have an agenda that is supported, this also gives you political power. Now, how exactly does this work? It follows that whole line of transition from girl to womanhood in particular. So at puberty, girls are separated for training. They're taken into the Bundu bush, and they go through the initiation process, which starts with female circumcision, and then flows into other activities, learning skills, learning knowledge, herbal knowledge, work ethic, and practical skills for how to be a wife, how to be a mother, because this is what is valued in those communities. And I need to emphasize here that a lot of the skills that these girls learn, the truth is they already know these things from when they are young children. They are taught how to take care of a home. They are taught how to cook, to sew, to mend things. They know these skills already. So what the training does is that it gives them a certain attitude towards this work. So they're not necessarily learning new skills; they're learning a particular attitude towards this work, and whether or not this attitude is beneficial is a separate debate, because these attitudes that they are trained in are in line with what the community believes is best for the community. And to be honest, a lot of these values and trainings in modern ways of looking at things can be, misogynistic, can be oppressive, but the framework itself is solid. It is a means by which a girl moves from being a girl to a woman. And in many communities, if you have not gone through this Bundu initiation process, you're not eligible to get married. You can't have children. It's considered that this initiation is what transfers you from a child who, in some of these communities, a child is basically not really fully a human being, but then you go through this process, this initiation, this training, then you become a fully realized woman. So what happens in this bush? There are accounts out there about what happens. I'm not going to go into too much detail because technically these are not supposed to be available to the public. But in general, the girls bond as they learn song, dances, and stories that have been handed down from ancestress to ancestress. So these include ways to take care of themselves, sexual hygiene, and things like that. And they bond over these shared experiences. The closest thing I can think about, especially as a Cameroonian woman, is the experience you have if you went to a boarding school, for example. The experience of being in Form 1 and just that trauma of being in this new environment where everything is so different. You form strong bonds over that. The girls in Bundu societies and in the Manikin society, as we will see, they bond over the pain and the trauma, honestly, of the circumcision process. They also bond, like I said, over the songs and dances and stories that they share. And then they they learn ways to protect themselves and how to, take care of themselves if they're sick. And they also just have a time to be happy together. And this is an important thing for female solidarity, how to enjoy each other's company, how to support each other, and things like that. And then after initiation, they are reintroduced into society as women. They can marry, they are highly prized. And this is important for their social development because they pass through the socially acceptable way to become a woman in their society, and this affords them a certain amount of protection and prestige. And the figure you see here is a Jolly Sowe mask, and this is the masquerade that comes out to dance when the girls are being reintegrated back into society. And per the local indigenous customs, this figure represents the ideals of beauty, and there is just a lot of rich symbolism in this mask, which is out of the scope of this discussion. But this is part of the ritual process through which these girls go through the rites of passages that they need to. And as I've mentioned before, there is a lot of secrecy around these organizations, which I'm trying to be careful as I talk about them. There are things in journal articles, you're free to go look them up for yourself. But the secrecy of these organizations is highly valued in these communities. They have this proverb, there's a thing passing in the sky, some thick clouds surround it, the uninitiated see nothing. So this value on secrecy is highly important, and it's not unique to Bundu or Sunday, as we will see. The next example we will look at is the Monikin, which comes from the Ejagam people found in Cameroon and Nigeria. And it's a women's society whose goal is also to train young women to maturity on issues of sexuality, marriage, homemaking, proper social comportment. What does Morning King mean? Mon in the Ejangam language means child, and King means cut or fixed. So Morning King is referring to the fact that this is a woman who has been cut or fixed. And the cutting or the fixing here does refer to female circumcision. So it's important to note that female circumcision is an important aspect of these initiation practices. And I need to come out and say clearly that my personal stance is that female circumcision is not a good thing. There are a lot of health risks associated with it. It has a lot of trauma, and many of the women who have gone through these initiations, whether it's Manikin or if it's Budo or Sunday, have reported that it doesn't, they felt more trauma, more pain, and it was more detrimental than beneficial. And that's a discussion we'll have at the end when we focus on female circumcision. But it is an aspect of these initiation processes. So the Monikim society is similar to the Bundu society, and I have a theory that, given that Guinea, Ivory Coast, Sierra Leone, Liberia, Nigeria, Cameroon are on the western coast of Africa, these societies, protocols, and rules diffuse through the populations in the societies, and it might have had to do with just trade or instability and people trying to find ways to keep their communities together, because there are a lot of similarities in how these societies function. So like the Bundu, the Monikim society as well, the girls are separated for a period of time. They go through these trainings, they're circumcised, and when they are reintroduced to society, they are considered, fully realized women, eligible to get married, eligible to become mothers. And the Ejagan people have another ritual that you go through if you're a woman and your husband dies to become a widow. We're not going to talk about that a whole lot. Um, but the outcome of initiation into the Manikin Society is that you can do the dance, and what you see here are Manikin dancers, and they have this beautiful dance that they perform. And I have watched some of these performances because I grew up in the southwest region of Cameroon, which is where the Ejagan people are found. And it's a beautiful performance, and you can really see that these girls enjoy each other's company. They have this shared experience. So this speaks to that balance between things that are beneficial and things that are detrimental that occur within these secret societies. Um, Another instance of a secret society or women's group also in Cameroon are the Takum the Anu, and the Finguen, which are found amongst various peoples of the Northwest region. I believe Takum is found amongst the Bafut people, and Finguen is found amongst I believe, is it the Com people or the Oku people, one or the other? My apologies, I'm mixing things up here. But these are also women's groups or secret societies which have a strong influence on social and political issues. To my knowledge, Takumbum and Lu and Finguen don't necessarily have female circumcision procedures that they undergo, but still they hold themselves to high standards of secrecy, and they can mobilize on behalf of the community. I remember growing up in Bamenda in the 1990s during some time of political unrest, and Takumbam is one of the women's groups that was mobilized to, stand up for the community. We had a case where the government was taking certain actions that the community did not approve of. This especially had to do with a rival political party which had its roots in the Northwest region. And when soldiers were sent to quell this rising movement, Takumbam is one of the groups that came out into the streets in protest, and they used one of a powerful way of protesting that these women have had for a long time, that is stripping themselves naked. And it is believed that to see the naked body of an older woman is a curse. And these women stripping naked basically quelled violent confrontation that was going to begin between supporters of the rival political party and supporters of the government. So, three examples of groups that have aspects of secrecy to them. And like I said, I am touching at the very surface level because I want to respect the secrecy of these groups. They do have aspects that I fundamentally disagree with, but that doesn't change the fact that they serve some purpose in their societies. So I'm going to circle back to talk about the ways in which these groups quite often perpetrate the oppression of girls and women. And this usually has to do with the context in which the groups operate and the end they serve. Now, if this is a patriarchal community, a deeply patriarchal community to start with, despite the fact that these groups are convened for and by women, the ultimate goal is that they usually serve the purposes of the community in which they live. A way to look at it is in the attitude that these girls are taught to take as they undergo the training. Because remember, I mentioned that the skills that they learn during this initiation processes, especially in more modern times, we could say, way back in the day when things were not the way they are now, keeping in mind that some of these groups have been in existence since the 1600s, the girls would learn, how to care for themselves in times of their period, and things that knowledge that we take for granted that we have now. So they're not necessarily learning new skills, but they are learning the attitude to take towards the work that they will do as women. And what does this attitude entail? Is usually one of compliance, one of submission to authority. And that's all fine and good if the authority is ultimately working in their favor. But if you have been in African communities, the tendency is that women are pushed to the side, and that if girls are being trained to take an attitude of compliance with this, then it's not really working out for them, is it? And complying with authority has its place in each society, especially if it's a young child learning how to operate within the norms of a society that has its place. But these are girls who are being trained to become wives, to become mothers. A certain amount of autonomy and independence is warranted, but this, from every indication, is basically trained out of them during these initiation processes, because the goal is to keep them compliant with what community demands of them. Another thing that shows up, which can be oppressive, is that it's not a uniform way these girls are treated during these initiation processes. So, if you have a situation where a girl from a wealthy family is being initiated at the same time as a girl from a not so wealthy family, there can be that imbalance in how they are treated. Quite often these initiation processes involve work, but of course, if you have a girl who comes from a privileged background, the work is not the same. The amount of work that they're expected to do is not the same. There are cases where some families are able to pay more, so their daughters don't have to endure as long periods of initiation. Meanwhile, some families who cannot afford some of these payments are not able to do that as well. So that creates a bit of an unfair hierarchy, which can get in the way of the bonding that is supposed to happen. Because if you have people already experiencing preferential treatment, that is reflected in the dynamics that is established within the group. A good way I can think about it is going through a boarding school, which is a kind of initiation process if you want to think about it. There were the girls who came from wealthy backgrounds, the girls who went abroad and things like that. And, sometimes they would have their cliques, which were quite different from, the girls who came from more disadvantaged backgrounds. And it's not to say that there weren't friendships that formed across these cliques, but they exist. And in the context, depending on the context, they can perpetuate some resentments and things which are not ultimately working for that female solidarity in the way that we think they should. Another aspect of this are the fees that are expected. I mean, it's hard to talk about these things without, going into detail about what obtains in these processes, but there are fees that are demanded sometimes which are unfair. And in the literature that I have read, there are people who have expressed concern about how exploitative this can get. And seeing that this falls on the woman's family or sometimes on the woman herself who wants to undergo the initiation, this can create a really oppressive and difficult situation to navigate for some people as opposed to others. There are also some reports that because this solidarity involves, keeping each other's secrets, blackmail and exploitation can factor into that. And these are things that, happen in the course of society, but then might be exacerbated given the highly secretive nature of these communities. So in the end, they don't ultimately work out in the women's favor. Now that we've spent some time looking at some women's organizations which would be termed more secret society than anything else, let us spend some time now looking at organizations that do not have secrecy as a main part of their protocols. We'll start with the Umada and the Yomdi of the Igbo people in Nigeria. Umada is a term for women from a particular lineage or community, and it includes those who marry men from outside of the community. So it is the case in some communities on the continent that if you marry into a community outside of yours, then you belong to this new community. Not so with the Igbo. With the Igbo through Umwada, women who marry outside of the communities retain a presence and influence in the communities, their natal communities. Inyomdi, on the other hand, is a term used to describe the married women within a given community. So it's all the married women within a given community, and they're headed by the oldest, the seniorest married woman in that community. Now, Umwada and Inyomdi are powerful women's groups within the Igbo people. And it's hard to talk about women's issues among the Igbo without Umwada or Inyomdi coming up. Umwada in particular, I believe that the Igbo women's riot, which happened in the colonial times and was a time when the women who sold in the market rallied together to push back against unfair taxes that were being levied on them by British colonial masters through their proxies. This riot, this rebellion, which fundamentally changed history in Nigeria, was organized by Umwada's linking up. So it's not a minor role that these organizations play in communities. Umwada in particular, as we just talked about, has a strong presence as a political pressure group, and they also have a unifying influence through the fact that you have women who are from their natal villages, and they also have community in their marital villages, so they serve as a link between these two communities for conflict resolution, for dispute resolution. Umwada also facilitates the rites, rituals, and sacrifices that concern women. Two examples are the absolution or purification rites that women who are about to get married or women who've committed adultery have to go through in order to restore them back to the community. Another thing that Umada does is facilitate the purification rites for cleansing of polluted areas. So there are certain things that if they happen within a community, it's a case of spiritual pollution, and Umwada's role is to facilitate these rites and rituals that would cleanse and restore balance. In Yomdi, on the other hand, is really focused on the wives within a given community. So if someone is stressed out or ill or being abused by her husband, Inyomdi is usually the one to step in there. It's not to say that Umwada will not play a role. Umwada, from every indication, is much more powerful than Inyomdi. But Inyomdi has this domain that they focus on, which is their own village. They keep their village clean, marketplace, streams, and things like that. And in more agrarian communities, they make decisions about the planting, care, and harvesting of crops. Inyomdi's role with protecting women who are being abused in particular really shines through. There is this case which, if you read through this little snapshot that I have here, is a case where a woman was being abused by her husband. She was being beaten by her husband, and the Inyomdi were called in, and they tried to talk to the man, and that didn't work out. So the women organized themselves. First, they started denying their husband's sex, then they stopped cooking for them, and then they all moved into the home of the woman who was being abused and told the man that, if you're going to beat this one of our sisters, then you have to beat all of us. And through these actions of solidarity and support for each other, the other men put pressure on this man to stop treating his wife so terribly. So these are the ways in which some of these women's groups traditionally have created a supportive environment for women in their communities. Another example is the Mauritius Women Cooperative, and it's found amongst the Maasai women in Kenya. Now, this women's cooperative includes married women and widows, and their mission is to empower themselves and their communities through income-generating activities. So they make beautiful blankets and necklaces, bead necklaces. They keep their folkloric traditions alive through storytelling and singing and dancing, and they also rear animals for milk, for meat, and things like that. So the long-term goal of the Mauritius Women's Cooperative is to reduce poverty and socioeconomic and cultural challenges facing Maasai women, because Maasai communities are very patriarchal. The women have little to no power. Female circumcision is an issue in these communities. So this organization has come together to provide the economic support, the social support, the spiritual support that these women need, and to support young girls, make sure that they go to school, participate in decision making, so that the women are assured of a better future, to teach good family and moral values to the children, and to just generally support the health of the women in their communities. And women's groups in Kenya is an example of, not all of them, but there are a good example of ways in which women have rallied together to support each other, especially to push back against the issue of female genital mutilation. And I say not all of them because there are still instances where some communities still advocate these practices which do not necessarily work out in the women's favor. But you have instances like the Mauritius Women's Cooperative, which are pushing back against this. Another is Umoja Village, found among the Samburu people in Kenya. You might know Umoja Village as the village where men are not allowed, and that is because this is a place reserved exclusively for women and their children. Umoja Village was founded in 1990 by Rebecca Lolosoli, and the context of this village's founding is that coming out of the colonial times in Kenya, there were women who had been raped by British colonial soldiers. There were women who had been raped or otherwise attacked by men in their own communities. There were women who were running away from forced marriages. Quite often these were young girls, and they had nowhere to go. They were living completely disenfranchised. So Rebecca found this piece of land that nobody wanted and set up this village, this community that became a community for women who had survived violence and needed somewhere to go. Now, the way Umoja Village is set up, men can visit, but they cannot live in the village. The only men who can spend the night in the village are men who grew up as young boys in the community. So it is reserved exclusively for women. The women are required to dress in the Samburu traditional attire, as you see in these pictures. And whatever earnings they get from their activities, they make the beadwork that you see. They make cloth. They have cultural activities that people pay to witness. They have tourists, they facilitate tourism in the surrounding areas. Whatever proceeds they get from these activities, they donate 10% of these earnings as a tax to the village to support the school, the cultural center, and all the other things that have been set up to facilitate life in this community. And if there is a need for decision making or dialogue or conflict resolution, the residents gather under the tree of speech to dialogue and to arrive at decisions that work best for the community. And what I really love about the Mauritius Women Cooperative and Umoja Village in particular, and Umada and Yomdi, and all these organizations, despite the things that might be questionable, is the fact that they show that women can work together. Women have always been working together for themselves, for their communities. And one of the ways in which colonialism really affected the African continent is that these mechanisms were disrupted, because if you have a situation where women have these organizations that they can belong to, through which they can empower themselves, and then you have an ideology comes in which says, these things are not okay, introduces different systems by which women can have solidarity, which go against the values within the community, then it's a disruption. It's a way of weakening the traditional systems. But fortunately, a lot of them have survived, complicated by human vices, complicated by human shortfallings. But that doesn't mean that they don't have value. And I think that is the one message that I want to communicate with this video, that there are a lot of things that don't work out with these communities, female circumcision, which we're about to talk about, being one of them. But there are a lot of things that do work out. There are a lot of things that can be emulated. The Mauritius Women's Cooperative, for example, support women getting educated. So instead of a training which might not necessarily serve the purposes of women in the world that we live in today, these initiation processes and trainings can adapt to the world that we live in now. This is work that will need to be done within the communities to educate people, to sensitize people. But I believe that it's not fair and it's not right to throw the baby out with the bathwater, to say that, oh, because some of these organizations have female circumcision, they should just be disbanded completely. The problematic issues can be addressed, but what is beneficial about them can be retained. Let's move on to the issue of female genital mutilation or female circumcision. Now, before I start, I want to give a content warning, because I will be describing this procedure in detail. It is a pretty violent procedure, so if you do not want to hear more about this, then perhaps this is the best time to stop watching the video. Thank you.
So what is female genital mutilation or female circumcision? It is a practice in which all or some parts of a woman's genitalia are cut or otherwise modified, usually without her consent. There are three types of female genital mutilation. The first is called the clitoridectomy, and this is a process in which the woman's clitoris is cut off. The second type is called an excision, and it is a process in which not just her clitoris, but her labia minor, so the little flaps of sensitive flesh that go below the clitoris, are cut off as well. And then there is a third type, which is called infibulation, and this is the more extreme case of it, where not just the clitoris and the labia minor are cut off, even the external vaginal lips, which is where hair grows, those are cut as well. And then usually in the space that is created, the flaps of skin are brought together and sewed shut, with just a little hole left for urine and menstrual blood to flow out. This is an incredibly painful procedure, and as I mentioned, quite often it is done against the woman or the girl's consent, and it is done when they are very young, and it is quite a traumatic experience. Female genital mutilation is a fairly common practice still, everything being equal. About 200 million women around the world have undergone some aspect of female genital mutilation, whether it's a clitoridectomy or the infibulation or somewhere in between. It is rare in certain parts of the world, but as migration patterns are changing, people take their practices with them. So if you look at the map that I have here, the darker parts show where there are high prevalences of um, female genital mutilation. More than half of the population have been affected in one way or the other. And you might look at the yellower, lighter colored parts of the map and think, well, this doesn't happen there. That one is because quite often these practices are done on the ground, and they just might not be prevalent. But as migration patterns change, then it's more common that you would find these practices even in the US, even in Europe, and in parts of the world where you wouldn't expect to see them. Now, why is female genital mutilation practices? There are several reasons advanced. Social acceptance. So, as we saw for the Sunday Society, for the Manikin Society, and other communities where FGM is practiced, it is considered a woman is not considered fully a woman unless she has undergone this process. So you have a situation where you get married. If your husband finds out that you have not been circumcised, then he sees you as not quite valuable as a wife. So social acceptance is a huge part of it. Belonging as well, because you have your cohort of friends, and if everyone has been circumcised and you haven't, you might be considered an outsider in your community. Religion is a huge part of it. Um, these circumcision practices usually are in line with people's religious beliefs, whether justified or not. For some people, they say it's a question of hygiene. So cutting off these parts of the body is a way to ensure that the woman stays clean. Um, Whether this is physical cleanness or spiritual cleanness, it varies on who is doing the interpretation. For some people, it's a question of preserving the virginity. So the clitoris and the labia minor in particular are one of the main organs through which the woman experiences sexual pleasure. So cutting them off is a deterrent to make sure that the woman stays pure and virginal until she gets married. Marriageability is an aspect that we've talked about before, and it's a rite of passage into womanhood to have your clitoris cut. And to enhance sexual pleasure, which this aspect just makes me cringe when I think about it, because and this usually is in the case of the infibulation type, where the vaginal opening is made small, and it's a question of tightness, which is just, it's horrific to think about, that someone will be subjected to something like this for another person's pleasure. But these are the things that happen in our communities. And the reason why I have hygiene highlighted is because of all these reasons that are advanced as reasons for female genital mutilation. Only one of them even seem to suggest that they are for the benefit of the woman. For the most part, it is to keep her pure for marriage, which is really another person's benefit. Is to make her tighter for another person's benefit. Is to make her socially acceptable to a community. So a lot of the reasons that are advanced for female circumcision or female genital mutilation have really little or nothing to do with the woman's well-being, and it's not in a direct sense. And what is interesting about female genital mutilation is that as you talk to women who have undergone the procedure, you have some women who really don't see it as a problem. And this is interesting because a lot of the framing around the reasons not to get circumcised as a woman is done around the issue of sexual pleasure. But one of the things that has, been proven is that the clitoris, the external part, is just one of the ways in which a woman can experience sexual pleasure. So some of the pushback you will get, especially when the reasons against female genital mutilation is framed as an issue of sexual pleasure, is that it really doesn't interrupt sexual pleasure. And the cutouts I have in this slide are from a conversation that a researcher had with Ejagam women in Cameroon. And one of them was basically saying, hey, if you guys just want to stop this practice, go ahead and stop the practice, but don't frame it as an issue of sexual pleasure, because it doesn't bother us. You have women who are saying, I'm circumcised, but I enjoy sex with my husband, so I don't know what it is that you people are talking about. But of course, you have cases where not only is this a deeply traumatic issue, experience for some of these women, even sex afterwards is just impossible. So there are conflicting truths out there about the practice, which calls for a certain delicacy in discussing it, because what usually happens is that people in activist fervor tell the thing the way they see it to be, but which might not necessarily reflect the women's reality. Another example that arose currently in Cameroon, where the Ejagan population is found, is also a hotbed of the crisis that is unfolding in the Anglophone regions of the country. So it's a war zone essentially. So you have gender activists who are going through and pushing back against female circumcision. You have these women saying, well, this is the least of our problems right now. There's a war going on. You have other things you should worry about. And I imagine it was a similar issue in Liberia and Sierra Leone during the times of the Civil War. Are you trying to stop a war, or are you trying to push back against, female circumcision? Not to say that these two things cannot be done at the same time, but usually what happens is that there is this zeroing in on this one issue and ignoring the context within which it happens. Another contextual issue to think about is if you have a society where this is one way that women access security and power to some extent is through marriage, and one of the requirements for marriage is that you are circumcised. Coming in with a message that casts circumcision as a bad thing is basically leaving women stranded, because otherwise, what are they supposed to do? So I want to be clear that my personal stance is that female circumcision or other forms of female genital mutilation should not happen. But there is a context within which this conversation needs to be had, and there are things that there needs to be some sensitivity to them.
Encouraging news is that across the African continent and the rest of the world where female circumcision is still a practice, there are concerted efforts by activists and other organizations and governments even to push back against the particular issue, and to do this in a way that is relevant to the context in which it unfolds. It is a slow effort. Changing a culture is not a small undertaking, but there has been significant amounts of progress on it, and more the spotlight is being shone on the issue in a way that highlights the difficulties without creating more problems for the women who it affects. So that's all I have for today. Thank you for making time to watch the video. It's a heavy and complex topic, so I hope I did it justice. I would love to hear your thoughts about the women's societies in general, FGM in particular, or any reactions you have to this video. Please let me know in the comments. If you have something that I didn't quite get right and you want to throw some light on, based on your own personal experience, please feel free to reply in the comments so a conversation can happen about it. However, I really appreciate your support to Mythological Africans, and I hope you have a great day.